The Great Awakening, Petrarch, Boccaccio, the mountain or the river. For 10 centuries, Europe was a funeral that wouldn't end. You were told you were a wretched being, a cosmic accident of sin, shivering in the shadow of a terrifying judgmental God. Your life? A miserable, drafty waiting room for the afterlife. The intellectual horizon was a flat line of dogma. But then, two men decided to commit a beautiful heresy. They stopped staring at the ceiling of the cathedral and started looking at the dirt, the trees, and the faces of their neighbors. They didn't just find dusty books. They found the human soul, buried under a millennium of neglect. Enter Francesco Petrarca, known to history as Petrarch. If the Middle Ages were a fever, Petrarch was the first man to wake up and realize he was sweating. He felt the Dark Ages, a term he actually coined, like a physical weight on his chest. Petrarch was a ghost hunter. He spent his life crawling through the damp, forgotten cellars of monasteries, his fingers bleeding from turning parchment that hadn't seen the sun in 500 years. When he finally unearthed the lost letters of Cicero in 1345, it wasn't just a discovery, it was a resurrection. In those pages, Petrarch didn't find dry theology. He found a Roman world where men spoke of dignity, of civic duty, and of the agonizing, beautiful power of the individual mind. Perhaps the most symbolic moment in the birth of the modern self occurred on April 26, 1336. Petrarch decided to climb Mount Ventoux in Provence, not for a pilgrimage, not to find a shrine, but simply to see the view. This was unheard of. In the 14th century, you didn't climb mountains for fun. Mountains were obstacles or seats of the divine. At the summit, he opened a copy of St. Augustine's Confessions and read a line that hit him like a lightning bolt. And men go about to admire the high mountains, and yet pass by themselves. Petrarch realized that the greatest vista wasn't the landscape below, but the landscape within. He was the first modern man to look in the mirror and say, "I am responsible for the architecture of my own mind." This epiphany fueled his manifesto, Remedies for Fortune, Fair and Foul, De Remediis Utriusque Fortunae. This was the first punch to the medieval gut. Petrarch looked at the chaos of the Black Death and the crumbling church and told the reader, "Be a fortress." He revived Stoic virtues, the idea that while you cannot control the plague or the politics of kings, you can control your reaction to them. He taught that you don't need a priest to act as a middleman for your character. You use reason. You build an internal wall against the fair and foul whims of fate. He also gave us the Canzoniere, a collection of poems dedicated to a woman named Laura. In these verses, he didn't write about divine love in the abstract. He wrote about the agony of desire, the sting of rejection, and the psychological complexity of being a man in love. He made human emotion a subject worthy of high art. But then, there's the younger brother in this revolution, Giovanni Boccaccio. If Petrarch is the architect building the fortress of the mind, Boccaccio is the guy throwing the party inside it. Boccaccio was Petrarch's greatest student and his most vital foil. While Petrarch was trying to master his passions through Latin gravity, Boccaccio was celebrating them in the vibrant Italian of the streets. He took Petrarch's classical revival and gave it a pulse, a scent, and a sense of humor. Boccaccio's life was defined by the Black Death of 1348. He watched Florence turn into a morgue. He saw the social fabric tear as parents abandoned children and priests fled the dying. In the face of this ultimate foul fortune, Boccaccio performed an act of intellectual surgery. He cut the wretchedness out of humanity. If the world was ending, Boccaccio argued, then our humanity, our wit, our stories, our laughter was the only thing that actually mattered. He didn't turn to the Bible for comfort. He turned to the dinner table. In his masterpiece, The Decameron, 10 young people flee the plague-ridden city to a villa in the countryside. To pass the time, they tell stories. These aren't parables about saints. They are stories about lovers, tricksters, corrupt friars, and clever merchants. Boccaccio introduced a lethal concept to the medieval order: ingegno, human wit. He argued that the desire for love, for sex, and for success isn't a fall from grace. It's the highest expression of being alive. He showed that a merchant who outsmarts a king is more noble than a knight who is merely born into a title. He replaced the divine with the human. He looked at the same world Petrarch saw and said, "The fortress is good, but the garden is better." This is where the narrative shifts. This is the punch that created the Renaissance. Petrarch's Stoicism was a philosophy of resistance. He believed that to be virtuous, you must be unshakable. If the world burns, you stand still. It is a philosophy of the mountain. Boccaccio offered a philosophy of navigation. He knew that humans aren't mountains. We are rivers. He taught us that when fortune strikes, you don't just stand there and take it. You outsmart it. You use your wit to turn a disaster into a story. Petrarch wanted to save the soul from the world. Boccaccio wanted to save the world for the soul. Petrarch gave us the armor of reason. Boccaccio gave us the permission to be human. One taught us how to survive the storm. The other taught us how to dance in the rain. Together, these two giants performed a miracle. They took a civilization that was obsessed with the after and made it obsessed with the now. They rescued the wisdom of Greece and Rome, bringing back Homer and Cicero, not to worship the past, but to arm the future. They told us that we are not wretched. We are clever, we are resilient, and we are worthy. The Dark Ages didn't end because the sun came out. They ended because Petrarch and Boccaccio lit a fire. And that fire, it's still burning in every one of us who dares to think, to love, and to laugh at the face of fate. The Renaissance started with a choice: to be a statue or to be a human. Which one are you?